My father has a lot of sides, and you hear about the fights. You don't hear about family that much and what that meant to him.
What's your dad's name?
Muhammad Ali.
No one, not even some members of his family, knew of the existence of these audio tapes until recently.
Mariam, you're now 11 years old.
They thread the narrative of the boxing champion's life in Claire Lewis's documentary. Ali's daughter, Hannah, offered the tapes to Lewis.
Say, I love my daddy.
I love my daddy. I love my poo-poo head daddy.
Okay.
My father was always conscious about history. And, I think that's one of the reasons why he made this series of audio tape cassette recordings.
Say, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee.
The film shows the whole world in love with him. Testimonials of friends and adversaries paint the Olympian and three-time boxing champion Cassius Clay, later Muslim convert Muhammad Ali, as a sensitive, poignant, and courageous man. Because he refused to serve in the Vietnam War, he was stripped of his championship title, and his boxing license was revoked. His close friend, former football player Jim Brown, remembers.
He had a lot of courage. The risk he had to take, and then to be isolated, to have his crown taken away, not be able to make a living, that was difficult.
But he stuck to his convictions, and in 1974, at the age of 32, Ali made a comeback.
When George Foreman meets me, he'll pay his debt. I can drown a drink of water and kill a dead tree. Wait till you see Muhammad Ali.
He defeated formidable George Foreman and recaptured his title.
I get into the ring with the guy. I bluffed him. I done everything. Beat him up basically for about 5 or 6 rounds. I thought it was easy. Then about the 6th round, he whispered in my ear after I'd hit him in the side, "That all you got, George?" And that was about all I had.
I Am Ali does not say much about his broken marriages, but it highlights his bond with his children.
I was the Concorde of boxing. I was at a high altitude than the rest, moving fast.
As Ali has aged, we hear him begin to slur his words, a sign of developing Parkinson's disease. He finally retired in the late 1970s, and in the mid-80s he was diagnosed with Parkinson's. But to the world and his children, he remains an icon of power and grace.
If anyone wonder why me, Muhammad Ali, is making these tapes, is because history is so beautiful.
Penelope Pulu, VOA News, Washington.
Nigeria's Niger Delta region, from where the black gold fuels Africa's largest economy, where the lines between wealth and poverty has never been thinner. Conflicts, poverty, insecurity, and environmental challenges daily confront the region. How can the Niger Delta story be changed for the better?
Join Mamude Akuga at 9 p.m. every Friday evening on PlusTvAfrica as he probes deep in search of solutions.
Inside the Niger Delta with Mamude Akuga, the authentic voice of Nigeria's oil-rich region.
Hello and welcome. It's Nimasa This Week, the voice of maritime. Nimasa This Week is brought to you by the Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency. Statutorily mandated to ensure that there is regulation and promotion of matters affecting our waters. NIMASA bears responsibility for search and rescue, shipping development, and ship registration.
Nimasa This Week, the voice of maritime, showing on this channel.
Increase the reach of your events or business services. To advertise on Plus TV Africa, please call 0906 000 5719 or 0909 040 8408, or send an email to marketing@PlusTvAfrica.com. Plus TV Africa. Big stories live here.
Contrary to popular belief, corona is not a hoax. The virus is real. Be responsible. Wear a mask. Wash your hands with soap and water and avoid crowded places. Maintain physical distancing. Be responsible. Together, we can overcome the pandemic.
Nigeria, by extension, Africa, is faced with a lot of challenges. The growing youth population with little engagement, that is a ticking time bomb. We are a blessed people with diverse culture and highly cerebral minds who have a lot to say. And yes, we are talking. It is important we drive the right conversation that informs, inspires, influences thoughts and action. If we say there's beauty in our diversity, then let us embrace our diverse culture. We must continue to courageously be the voice of transformation, as we are the hope for the future. Yesterday's conversations shape today. What are you saying to shape your tomorrow? We know you have a lot to say, and we are here to hear you.
Reject coups, President Muhammadu Buhari tells world leaders, and insecurity rages as several persons are killed in two separate attacks in Kaduna State. This is Plus Politics, and I am Mary Anacom. President Muhammadu Buhari has told world leaders to reject coup d'etat, especially in West Africa. President Buhari decried the recent trend of unconstitutional takeover of power, saying it must not be tolerated by international community. He urged the international community not only to deal with the symptoms of conflict, but also to the immediate causes that fuel the conflict in the first place. He said these and more in his speech at the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. President Buhari warned that democratic gains of the past decades in West Africa are now being eroded due to those negative trends. Well, joining us to discuss this is political analyst Chike Chude, Richard Wokocha. He's an associate professor of public law, River State University, and Ataguba Aboje, who's also a legal practitioner. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Yes. I'm going to start with you, Professor Wokocha. Let's start by considering the root causes of these coup d'etats. Now, let's not forget that in the past 3 months, if not in the past year, we've seen several attempted and successful coups. There was one in Mali. We've seen the one that just happened with Alpha Conde. And there have been several others. Let's look at the root causes because, yes, just as the president has said, we need to say no to these coups, but how do you avoid these coups from taking place if we do not address the core reasons or the causes?
Somewhat difficult. Coups are potentially and essentially political activities. And they are more likely to happen where you have circumstances that can be pleaded as reasons why quote and unquote patriots are intervening. Now, if you check a number of the countries in which this has happened, that's not to say that it's limited to such countries. You will find that what others take for granted in other parts of the world, the right to choose and change your government from time to time, is one that is not really available in those places. In some of them, yes, you have the regular ritual of elections, but the same persons return themselves over and over again. And so if you have bad government, you have bad economy, and people cannot see any progress, any reason to continue with the circumstances in which they find themselves, you create room for adventurers to seize advantage of that environment you have created to brand themselves patriots who are intervening in the interest of the people. Every suffering people will always rejoice if what appears to them, even if it is just on the surface, to be a symbol of their hardship, is taken away. There will always be some level of support for such activities. So I think bad governance and very poor democracy, because if people have the right to change their government and they see that right being implemented by them, they will hold themselves responsible if they are not choosing the right people. But in the situations where dictators change constitutions and give themselves opportunity to contest more and more times, as it has happened in a number of those countries, you can be sure you will have thousands of people in the streets celebrating whenever this kind of activities happen. But it's not in our interest, and somehow we must find a way to deal with it.
Achike, there seems to be similarities in most of the coups that have happened lately. Again, I go back to the latest, which is the one that happened in Guinea. Now, you saw the number of people that flooded the streets right after the coup happened. It seemed like the people were on the side of the soldiers, or rather the army, no matter how, violent it seemed, even though it seemed like the people were very excited about it, maybe because their voices were not heard by the government, the civilian government, or maybe because they themselves were tired. But they keep talking about the fact that there was high-handedness in these governments. And we tend to see that happen across, the countries in Africa. But then we are the same people who have been asking for independence. We have gotten independence, but we become enslaved again by the leaders who swore to protect and serve us. Why is that?
Well, I think you just mentioned that part of the reason. I think the professor has also talked about that. The reality is that, there are certain expectations when it comes to the issue of governance. It comes to issues of democracy. Democracy is not exactly the magic one, but there are certain, minimum expectations by a people who have willingly gone out to express themselves through the electoral process by voting in leadership. They expect these political leaderships to carry out certain essential duties and responsibilities as enunciated by their own constitution, the welfare and the security of the people of the state. And in most cases, they have not been able to achieve that. So the people will begin to question even the basis of all of the elections and their participation within that process itself. And then so when you now mix it up with some of the things the Nigerian president talked about, the human rights abuses in a democratic dispensation, poverty that is supposed to be solved by the politicians, corruption and some other things, inequality and all of those divisions. So all of these things provide a ground or basis for any group of military adventurers to come in and make claims, about and also emphasize on the dire situation that the citizens find themselves in, which ultimately, the citizens will definitely agree, because that is what we have, the misgovernance that we've had, across the continent of Africa, especially in West Africa. So the president has said a lot of some of these things, but even some of these issues that the president is talking about are also prevalent in his own country, in Nigeria. We're talking about, the human rights abuses, the inequality, poverty, and so on, are also things that characterize even the Nigerian state today as it is. But do not also forget that the reaction of people really is as a result of what they see as the failure of political leadership, like I have said, to provide, a meaningful existence for themselves. We saw it in Nigeria. There is no single coup that took place in this country that did not receive the approval of the citizens of Nigeria. Even though people will tell you that, a military rule is an aberration to democracy, it's antithetical to democracy. But in the midst of the people, you question the people would ask is, what is the alternative? The alternative is bad governance. The alternative are people who change at will. The constitutions of the express constitutions of their countries, giving themselves, extending their time, their time limit, to remain in government and all that. So, is this feeling of disillusionment really that has led to this intervention by the military? Of course, military intervention because they have no solution to the problems that they are trying to, point out. Ultimately, they end up causing, more confusion within their polity. But it is the misgovernance that the president talks about that is also leading to some of these issues. Back to you, Professor. The president has been asking that leaders reject coup d'etats and unconstitutional takeover of power by the army. But then let's look at the means that the people have to reach out to their leaders. Again, I take you back to Guinea, which is something I've covered lately. In Guinea, we saw a very bloody protest when the president decided to tamper with the constitution and elongate his tenure. Now, I'd also like to backtrack to remind you of who Alpha Condé was. He was one of the people who was in opposition to the government of the day. He spoke about a lot of things that he is or was doing when he was in power. And so I'm looking at it from the people's perspective. How do the people get justice? How do the people get a responsible government if every means that they try, every means that should be available to them to get government to be accountable and get dividends of whatever it is, whatever they call a democracy in their domain, is stifled or they cannot have access to it? Does this not, of course, open the doors to these soldiers, even though, again, there's a downside, we all know, to soldiers taking over power. But we tend to see that the people's hands are tied. So how do the people get their governments to be responsible or hear them when all those channels are being plugged? Professor, can you hear me? I think that we lost him. We lost that connection with Professor. All right, Achike, can you take up that question, please? So, briefly recap. Yes, so I'm saying that I was giving you a background to who Alpha Condé is, and of course, all the things that happened, the fact that he was in opposition, he canvassed over and over to be in that position, and finally he got that position and did everything that he criticized the opposition at the time for doing. And now the people are obviously on the receiving end. So if the President Buhari is saying that leaders should reject, but is it enough to reject when that leader is also stifling the rights of the people? So you see, I think that rejection, should start with the citizens of the countries concerned that we're talking about. That rejection should, because governance is about the citizens, so when you have, and so citizens should have the primary responsibility of looking after their country. Like somebody has said that the price we have to pay for democracy is eternal vigilance. So citizens must be eternally vigilant about their politics. They should be, make constant demands on their political leadership. So that is the first step. The second step, really, is maybe for the international community when the leadership, the political leadership, has not lived up to expectation. And then you have this incursion, this rude incursion into the political life of the country by the military. Then the next stage is, first of all, a denunciation of that action by the citizens. But unfortunately, like you have said, in this case, you have citizens welcoming, something that is clearly an aberration. And then there's a role that the international community should play. And in fairness to the international community, unlike what we used to have in the past, when some of them will reluctantly welcome people, the putschists who have been involved in a coup, the response usually, in especially seeing the spate of coups in West Africa in the past 1 year, the response by the international community has been very serious condemnation of the military, of the action by the militaries, by the military purchases. And of course we have seen, the diplomatic moves and maneuvers by international organizations, especially giving support to the regional body, the ECOWAS, to do whatever it is, that should be done, that can be done, to ensure that the coupists do not continue to remain in power. So they have done that. They have always condemned that. But beyond that, you see, there is one fundamental factor that our president is forgetting. Nigeria must lead by example. Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa. Nigeria has the biggest economy in Africa, and there's so much expectation on the shoulders of Nigeria. Unfortunately, Nigeria has not been able to live up to expectation. Why am I saying so? Nigeria has intervened meaningfully in coup that has been undertaken by the militaries of some of these other countries, even within Africa. We've had an intervention in the Central African Republic, one of the countries in Central African Republic, that sought to the immediate reversal of a coup that took place because of the enormous pressure that Nigeria brought to bear on that country. Then in West Africa, we remember what we did with regards to Sierra Leone, when Fode Sanko and some of his rebel groups took over the government of Sierra Leone. Nigeria, went into Sierra Leone and reversed it with the aid of other West African countries. So the reason why some of these things are happening within, the West African sub-region in our neighboring country is simply because of the weakness of the Nigerian state. Otherwise, if you had a country in Nigeria that is strong and viral, as we had about 25, 30 years ago, the fact that Nigeria has become a democracy, even though it's not exactly working, but the fact that we are running a democracy will not embolden, any of the military and all of these other surrounding West African countries to have done what they have done, and that is the illegitimate takeover of the government, of their governments. And so it is Nigeria's weakness in a way that has also encouraged some of these people. And if you look at the resolutions that the ECOWAS ends up, undertaking with some of these, the people, the military actors that were involved in this illegitimate overthrow of legitimate governments, you realize that it would appear that they are being rewarded, that is, the coupists are being rewarded for the act of subverting the constitution of their countries. What do I mean by that? The transitional arrangement that is usually put in place by ECOWAS also involves members of the military, coupists, of the coupists that took part in that coup. So it is a form of rewarding people who have embarked on an illegitimate action by making them involved in the process of seeking, a transitional government. So that is what encourages most of these coupists. Ultimately, at the end of the day, they're going to say, well, the least that will happen is that ECOWAS is going to get involved in an international community, and we're going to be involved in being part of the government that is going to, emerge as a result of the transitional program that was put in place. So these are part of the problems that we're having.
Let's move away from that and talk about some of the other things that the president raised. He talked about he sought for debt cancellation outrightly for countries that were facing severe challenges, saying that Nigeria, most importantly, will not continue to seek aid. He also spoke of equitable COVID distribution. Let's start with the aid part of it and the debt cancellation. The last time we had our debts cancelled, we still had Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala as our Minister of Finance Minister and the Minister for the Economy. And several years down the line, here we are again asking for debt cancellations. But I want to start by asking, of course, you're a citizen of this country and you know obviously the ins and outs of government and all that they've said they're doing. How well do you think that we as a Nigerian state, whether it be the Buhari administration or past administrations, how well have we done when it comes to the monies that we borrow and say we want to use for infrastructural development or whatever? How well have we done with those monies? And the areas in which we pump these monies into, are there plowback profits? Could they be the reason why we're unable to pay back our debt? So are we going to blame everything on COVID-19?
Well, the reality is that the world is not going to save Africa if Africa doesn't save itself. That is the general agreement that Africa has to save itself. And one thing that is also clear is that trillions, hundreds of billions of dollars have been borrowed over the past 50 years in Africa, and we have not seen anything significant in terms of changing the political and economic landscape of Africa. So aid has not been very useful to Africa. Of course, there are so many issues. So many reasons responsible for that.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to speak over you, but when you say aid has not been very useful to us, are you saying we don't need it, or we need it, but we're not managing it properly? Which one is it?
Yeah. I think it's a bit of both. We don't, for a continent that is mightily blessed. Do not forget that most of the major minerals in this world, around which the economies of the globe revolve, are found in Africa, and that's why you have this scramble, this competition between the Europeans, the Americans, and the Chinese for Africa's very rich resources. So, and that means that if we get our acts right, if we get our politics right, we will be able to harness these resources for the purpose of developing the African continent. And so we do not really, under normal circumstances, have any serious business borrowing money when the essence of when we have everything that is needed to run the African continent, properly, if only we have people who can manage the resources. And so when we now find ourselves even in the situation where we now have to borrow money, what do we do with the money? So I think that also comes to what you have just said, the issue of the prudent management of these resources. And the reality is that most of these monies are stolen and frittered away and mismanaged completely, outrightly. And so that's why we have not been able to see anything meaningful about that. We talked about what Obasanjo did. They using his clout and that of Okonjo-Iweala with the international financial, multilateral financial organizations to write off Nigeria's debt. We had a debt profile of around $32 billion then, and then we were asked to pay, a whopping one tranche of $12 billion, which we had, and then paid that, and then we are forgiving $18 billion. How many years down the line? About maybe 15, 16 years down the line, Nigeria is owing a whopping $36 billion. And there's a representation that has been made by this present government to the National Assembly for an additional $4.something to $5 billion. So that will shoot our debt profile to, I think, around $41 billion. So what it means, is that from 2015 till now, 2015, we had a debt profile of around $12 billion. We have borrowed to about 200% of that, at this particular point in time, and we're still borrowing money. So what have we been able to do with the monies that we have borrowed all these years? There's nothing to show for it. Nigeria remains the poverty capital of the world. There's gross inequality, and the economic dislocation for a lot of Nigerians and all that. So when the president is asking the international community, for their forgiveness, it's a joke, because they know what is going on in this country. They know the quantum of money that has been given, to Nigeria, and they have an idea how much these monies have been frittered by the political elites in the country.
But this government is the government that I do not know if but the truth is this government had come in to plug those loopholes according to their campaign. They're here to fight corruption and make sure that monies that are allocated for different things go to those areas. So are you saying that this government has also, one way or the other, soiled its hands in terms of monies that should be allotted to projects and implementations?
Well, this is not me. This is not me saying it. This is Transparency International saying it. Nigeria's position in terms of transparency today is worse than it was in 2015. So what does that mean? That we have not been having prudent, management of our resources, and so then the stories of corruption that has gone on unabatedly in the country, all this while, and so it's not me. It is the facts that are on ground, and there is really nothing to show for it. The educational system has not been revamped. The present government told us they are going to do something about education. They told us they are going to do something about road infrastructure. They told us they are going to do something about so many other things in the country, and all of these things have not been done. So telling us that they are going to, plug loopholes and so on. I mean, it's not in the saying, but it's in the doing. And when it comes to delivering on the promises that they have made to the Nigerian people, we can't really say that they have done much in that direction. Corruption has continued, like I just made reference to the latest, last transparency report of Transparency International about the level of corruption in the country. And so we have not really done so much. And so you find a president that is appealing to the international community, a president that has not been able to stem the tide of corruption, also telling the international community to forgive us, just as they had forgiven us before. And under him, much more money has been borrowed, than in his administration than any other administration or all other administrations put together in this country. So you don't want to give that kind of administration, debt forgiveness. They must have something on ground to fall back on, to know that even if we do this, that these monies are going to be properly managed. And so far from what they are saying, there's nothing to show that.
Well, finally, let's talk about the COVID aspect of Mr. President's speech. He talked about, he thanks the international community and their initiatives, the financial institutions, for significantly mitigating the situation, of indebted countries. But then he spoke about the equitable distribution of COVID-19 vaccinations, which is a very big issue. It's a front burner issue as we speak right now. And let's not forget the fact that the United Kingdom has come up with a particular protocol where they have somewhat said that those who have been vaccinated in Africa, they do not necessarily consider that vaccination a standard of sorts. And then we have anti-vaxxers here. Oh, Professor, you're back with us. Okay, so let me throw that question to you. Let's talk about the politicization of vaccination, especially in Africa. There is one school of thought where there are people who are saying, well, Africa has so much potential. Why aren't we have so many researchers, some of them working within and without Africa. Why are we unable to create our own vaccines that are also of the same standard with the ones that we are getting from the UK, from the US? And then there are also the people who are anti-vaxxers, on the other hand, who have come up with all kinds of conspiracy theories and reasons to why they would not take this COVID vaccination. Now, with what the UK government has said, it calls to question the vaccinations that we're getting from them. Are they giving us low standard vaccinations if they're saying that those vaccinations don't qualify us to come into their country without having to quarantine for at least 7 to 10 days?
Well, I think it should appear they are trying to play safe. As you have said, there are a lot of theories, conspiracy theories about the COVID vaccine, COVID-19 vaccine. And our indecision is one that has, I think, has attained international recognition. And so if a country is uneasy about travelers from our region coming into their countries after vaccination, it could possibly be a hesitation arising from the fact that they are not certain that we are doing the right thing. As for the quality of the vaccine that we are getting, remember that we are open to all manner of vaccines, and we are receiving more than the vaccine from one particular country. And so I wouldn't think it's a function of what they are giving us being low. There are a number of them that are available and a number of them that are in use in this country. So if they have doubts about the one they are giving us, I don't think the same doubt can be extended to the one we are receiving from other countries, which people in their country are also receiving and are being counted as having been fully vaccinated.
Well, again, a lot of African countries seem to be still at the mercy of these other European countries and the Americas as to who gets the vaccination. And there seems to be some politicking to it. What do you think is our challenge here in Africa, and why can't we produce our own vaccines?
First, on who gets what and why we don't seem to be getting enough. You are not an equal stakeholder here. So you're not bargaining at the same level. And definitely you get only after the nations that have the strength to bargain have done so and gotten what they want. So there is no question that we cannot contend at that level and get exactly the same treatment and the same quantity as stakeholders or those that are equal stakeholders with the producers are getting. Now, on why we don't seem to be producing our own, vaccines are scientific productions. Science requires commitment, a lot of funding, and a lot of commitment. If you look at our attitude, our political environment do not seem to support such commitment and such seriousness. That's not to say we do not have the minds and we do not have the brains, but do they have the environment? Do they have the facilities with which to do what they need to do? When they leave these shores, they become inventors and they become great minds outside. But within, I'm afraid they do not have the environment and they do not have the support that they need, as well as the funding that is required to get those breakthrough productions like vaccines and the rest of them. So it's neither here nor there. We have no strong commitment as a nation or as a region. We have no strong commitment to funding and supporting inventiveness and scientific discovery. So we shouldn't expect to discover it the way others are doing or to come by those vaccines the way others are doing. You don't expect to get your ship in if you have not sent one out. We haven't made the investment that produces vaccine.
It makes me really think that we might just be begging for a long time until we get our acts right. But I want to say thank you to Professor Richard Wokocha. He's an associate professor of public law, River State University, and Chike Chude, who is a politics analyst. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being part of the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for staying with us. We'll take a short break now. And when we return, we discuss the insecurity in some parts of the country as several persons have been killed in attacks in Kaduna State. We'll be back shortly.
Nigeria's Niger Delta region, from where the black gold fuels Africa's largest economy, where the lines between wealth and poverty has never been thinner. Conflicts, poverty, insecurity, and environmental challenges daily confront the region. How can the Niger Delta story be changed for the better?
Join Mamude Akuga at 9 p.m. every Friday evening on PlusTvAfrica as he probes deep in search of solutions.
Inside the Niger Delta with Mamude Akuga, the authentic voice of Nigeria's oil-rich region.
Unfortunately, one person was yesterday killed while several others sustained various injuries in an attack on a church in Katia local government area of Kaduna State. The gunman was said to have attacked worshippers during a Sunday morning service. In a similar vein, one person was also killed by gunmen in Kamacha community. The Commissioner for Internal Security and Home Affairs, Samuel Arwan, who confirmed both incidents, said security agencies reported the attack to the state government, noting that the injured worshippers were taken to the hospital. He said the attack was condemned by the governor, Nasser El-Rufai. Well, joining us to discuss this is Joseph Hayab. He's the Secretary General for the Christian Association of Nigeria, CAN, in Kaduna State. Reverend Hayab, I do not know if I can say it's really good to see you, or it's, well, it's on a sour note that we have to say good evening to each other.
Thank you very much. I'm actually the chairman of CAN Kaduna State.
Okay.
So that our viewers will know the difference, so that tomorrow they won't assume we are changing.
Apologies for that.
No problem.
Well, so I'm almost at a loss for words when we have to have these conversations, because I think we're having too many of them. You know, almost every month we have to have a conversation on Kaduna State. And recently the state was having an event of sorts, which is asking for people to come and invest in Kaduna State. But then we're seeing many more cases of insecurity in Kaduna State. And I'm wondering, is this not a bad picture that were, or bad advertisements of sorts that we're sending to people who were asking to invest in the state. And it's not just about banditry. We're having all forms of insecurity, and now it's going into places of worship. As the Christian Association of Nigeria, I know that you're not the government. You may not be able to have answers to all my questions, but what advocacies are you pushing for security, not just for schools, that you can also have in your places of worship, and not just in churches, but also in mosques?
Well, thank you very much for having me on this program. And thank you for your show of concern about what is going on in Kaduna. But as you've rightly said, we recently hosted a very important investment summit. But just a few days after, we, on our own, again, we are coming with stories as if we do not even want investors to come. But to make viewers know exactly what is happening, I think there's a mix-up about this story. This whole story, there was no church that was attacked yesterday in Kaduna. What happened is that it's a community of Christians. So gunmen came into that community after church service, not in church. They didn't meet the people in church. The people had even dispersed and went home. They kidnapped 27 people. And as they were trying to get out of that community with them, someone who is a Christian was coming into that community, unknowing what was happening. Then he was asking questions and the gunmen opened fire on him. I feel the Commissioner on Security didn't do enough search and went out to give such a story that is big today in Nigeria, but it's not true. There was no church that was attacked. The real community that were attacked and people were killed is in Kaura local government. We know that over 40-something people were killed last night. But this story that is all over Nigeria today is uncalled for, has no reason. But we've just realized that it's another pattern of our government to always come up with stories to scare people, to always come up with a story to whip sentiment, to always, because the way and manner he presented the story is that he was commiserating with ECWA, and ECWA never even knew anything about it. It took us.
So why would you think that Samuel Aron, the Commissioner for Security, would want to paint this picture as opposed to what you have said really
I don't
happened?
know what he intends to gain. This is not the first time. There was a time he came out and said that bandits had went to a school in Ikara to kidnap students, and security men how to repel them, and nothing like that ever happened. So I think it's already a business that some of us don't even understand. Because what I did yesterday was, when this story came out, I reached out to virtually because the system we have is that we have CAN at local governments, we have CAN at zonal levels, we have CAN in local communities. So once there's a problem in a community, they will pass it to the zonal level, and the zone will pass it to the local government, and the local government will send it to us in the state. Nobody could pin down this story. Since ECWA was involved, I called the ECWA headquarters. We keep talking with ECWA headquarters till 3 o'clock this afternoon before we understand that this story has nothing to do with the church building. And why I'm saying this, emphasizing it, is what exactly do they want to achieve by bringing such kind of story that a church was attacked? Quote me, there was no church that was attacked yesterday. The attack that happened in Kaduna State yesterday was actually kidnappers that kidnapped a community, not in the church. They were not during service. And as they were going, this man that you learned that was killed was actually a visitor coming into the community and just fall a victim and was gunned down, but not in the church. It has nothing to do with church. Yes, he is an ECWA member, but it was not in the church. So government must not be confusing us. I called the PPRO of the police yesterday night. I challenged him to verify this story. I called him again this afternoon. I challenged him and he said, look, when he was actually the one who called me, and he realized that I didn't know. Then he knew that something was wrong with that story, because there's no way something will happen to a church and Khan is not aware, since we have a structure that we can confirm. Someone should take us back to that church. Let us go and see that church. Let us know the church that was attacked. I think they owe us an apology to come out and tell people such kind of story when nothing actually happened. When I read on many pages of newspaper today, and I just realized how difficult it is when we have serious issues that they have failed to tackle, and they are bringing stories that do not even exist.
What are these serious issues that you think that the government of El Rufai has refused to tackle?
We are aware that our children kidnapped on the 5th of July have not yet all come back. As at yesterday, 10 were released more, and we still have 11. Imagine children in a kidnap den for 82 days. Children, not adults, children.
What do you expect the government to do? Because they seem to be in between a rock and a hard place. And let's not forget that the governor had also publicly said that he was opposed to paying of ransom to free anybody that was abducted.
For those of us who know, sometimes when we hear it from you media, we just laugh at it. Because the reality is that he was the first governor who came out publicly and said, and I quote, on one of the national television, that he had to even follow gunmen to some part of Africa or some West African countries and pay them money. And he said that if there was any way people can advise him that he should do that to stop the killing, let us. So why suddenly this change of guard? But let me put it clear
but of course,
to
he's a human being. Isn't he allowed a change of heart? Probably he realized he made a mistake and that he probably was funding terrorism, and that's why he decided to take a step back.
At the time, he do not understand. But let me put it clear. We have never and will never require that our governor should negotiate with bandits, because we know if our government negotiates with bandits, it will be difficult, it will be bad for all of us. What we demand from government is one, she has sworn to protect lives and properties. If she do that, this banditry we are seeing, this killing we are seeing will not happen. I have ever said this and I want to repeat, that the Bethel Baptist High School is just 5 kilometers away from the NNPC Kaduna. If federal government on NNPC cannot be protected by government 15 to 20 to 30 kilometers away from that place, and this kind of evil can happen 5 kilometers to NNPC, it tells a lot about the security situation we are in. It tells a lot about the lip service we are giving to security. It tells a lot about the politics we bring into security. And we are not just honest. We are simply saying that if there is an incident, cross-check it and get the right fact. Don't just jump. Because today in Kaduna, we are being governed by media statements. Someone is just sitting down and pass media statement, and everybody just take it as if it is true. And we get confused. People sometimes call us and put us under fear. We learn that, no, yes, killing is going on in Kaduna. We're not disputing it. But this particular story, I want to repeat, they were misinformed and they hastily went out to the press without cross-checking the facts about this story.
As much as, we know that several insecurity issues have cropped up. In fact, for a time there, I actually, thought that Kaduna had become a playing field for these bandits. But then CAN, in collaboration with other CSOs or Christian organizations, whether it be PFN or the Enlarged Forum, where you have the Christians and the Muslims, all as stakeholders. Yes, we know that you have issues with how government is addressing the issue of insecurity, but has there been some form of a handshake across the table between you and the government? Has there been a forum where a conversation is being had with the government as to the way forward, as to how these issues can be best handled? Because it's one thing to criticize the government, it's one thing to scream at the government, but it's another to see how you can work with them to put an end to this insecurity. Has that been done? I think we lost the connection with Reverend Hayab. We'll see if we can get him back quickly. We'll just take a quick break and we'll get him back.
What we do not understand, we will stigmatize.
What you can see is the remaining of the tanker that exploded.
The suspect equally confessed.
Welcome back to Still Plus Politics, and as we do the home stretch, Reverend Hayab, I asked the question, I think we lost that connection before I asked that question. Has there been a handshake across the table? And by that handshake, I mean, has there been a liaison of sorts, a round table or a conversation with the government as to how you both can synergize and see how you can put an end to the insecurity in the country? It's one thing to criticize the government. It's one thing to say that the government is not doing right. But has there been a collaboration? Has there been an outreach to the government? And what has been the response?
So many groups are putting a lot of effort to help this government in addressing insecurity. But sadly, this government is a government that seems to be proud herself. She knows everything. She can do everything. She understands everything. And every time she just go out to the public and accuse people just like that. But the reality is that nothing is being done to tackle security. What they just do is simply to go always on media, rush to give information that are not correct, rush to instigate people against one another, rush to paint a picture that does not exist. But when there is a true crime, when there is a true security breach that is happening, they will turn their face away. And I think that's why some of us in Kaduna are so worried. What kind of leadership are we getting? Are we being governed by media? Is it just a story of media? We really want to see Kaduna progress. People have made sacrifice and are still making tremendous sacrifice to make sure that things work and work good for Kaduna. But the truth is that we are disappointed. What we thought was good had turned out to be something else. This particular story, I want to insist, was wrongly presented. It is not right. There was no event like that. The fact that the confusion was because they mixed up the story with other local government. But when we followed carefully and realized that story is not like that, and we appeal to them to please correct this story so that they will not continue to paint the entire people in bad light and put the Christian leaders on tension that there was an attack on church, and then when we called them for an attack, what did they do? Why are they bringing an issue of an attack when there was nothing? Why did they rush to call that they are sympathizing with ECWA, that they show concern with ECWA? Well, ECWA did not even know what happened.
I struggle, I really sincerely struggle with the fact that the El-Rufai government would, in one breath, and spend so much money to try to get people to come to invest in Kaduna State. And then in another breath, turn its attention away from the insecurity in the country. I find that very hard to believe. Because if I want people to invest in my business or in my state,
believe, but those of us
I would make sure that it's a safe haven for people to come and invest, because nobody wants to invest in a place that's not a safe haven. So I'm really struggling to understand how this government, according to you, is not paying attention to insecurity. They're more of a media government, according to you. But then they, through this big event, asking people to come to their state and invest. It's a bit ridiculous to break down.
Let me just take you 4 weeks back. The government of Kaduna State came out publicly and said she was going to lock down or shut down all schools because the military were going to go into an exercise to get rid of bandits all over Kaduna. Schools were shut down, but within that period, the attackers went to NDA, attacked, killed, and even kidnapped a military man. And kidnapping just continued in the state. When we've not even have solution to that, they quickly again said that schools should reopen. And still, kidnapping and killings are going on in Kaduna State. That's why some of us who have been following the events realize that this whole thing is just a political gimmick. We've not really sit down to address the issues that are going on. We have not really sit down to look at this insecurity and address them. The fact about it is that those who openly come out in Kaduna to shout that something is wrong, people are not secured, I call names, but the reality is that people are being killed. Last night, I just told you 40-something people in Kaura local government were killed in Kaduna State. What steps have government taken to secure these people? But every day on newspaper, every day on the television, we see a lot of things that gives a picture as all is well, but all is not well. As a Bible student, I'm familiar with this. During Prophet Jeremiah, people will come out and say it is well, when the reality is that all is not well. Kaduna is really in a mess. But since we have chosen to listen to governance by media, we will continue to die, but watch fantastic stories on television.
Well, it's a bit confusing, but I hope that everybody stays safe, including you, and hopefully something changes and things take a different turn. Reverend Joseph Hayab is the CAN chairman for Kaduna State. Thank you very much for speaking with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me too.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all for staying with us and being part of the great conversations we've had tonight. I'll be back tomorrow, same time on Plus TV Africa. I'm Mary Anako, and have a good evening.
Hello and welcome. It's Nimasa This Week, the voice of maritime. Nimasa This Week is brought to you by the Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency. Statutorily mandated to ensure that there is regulation and promotion of matters affecting our waters. NIMASA bears responsibility for search and rescue, shipping development, and ship registration.
NIMASA This Week, the voice of maritime, showing on this channel.
Good people, I greet you. It's great to reminisce about good memories of my past. A past that shaped my present and a present that hopefully will shape not only my future, but that of our children and incoming generation. My name is Igo Temu Oko, born and bred in Warri, Delta State. Warri of those days was a town of peace, purpose, and communal spirit. Trusts were hardly betrayed. Support for each other was the order of the day. Growing up in Warri was fun. With the beauty of our rich culture and traditions, we often looked with nostalgia to the season of Okere Juju, an annual masquerade festival with epic center of the celebration at Okere main roundabout or square. The elegance and beauty of the festival, graced by masquerades in attires almost akin to the costume and apparel worn by Eyo masquerade in Lagos. It is a mix of culture, tradition, dancing, and humor. So don't wander too far when you ask how Warri has evolved to be the root of comedy. It is rooted in our culture. I also recall with fond memories the great Agbasa Juju Cultural Festival, a colorful festival celebrated by the people of Agbara Warri Kingdom. It is a warlike festival popularly called Agbasa Juju. The date of the festival is chosen according to the Urhobo native market days by the Olotu and the elders of the kingdom, where the respective towns are expected to come in a dance procession with their warlike costumes. What a beauty to behold. I wonder how deep and rich our children are today in our culture and traditions. Interesting cultures are warning for different reasons, ranging from westernization to mere indifference of traditional institutions and practice. Time won't permit me to delve much on what we miss as a nation if we do not preserve our culture. This is a serious food for thought for us as a nation. Yes, Warri was fun, but the need for education took me out of Warri at the age of 17 when I got admission to the University of Lagos. At 17, I was bold enough to take on the world. I was wise enough to understand the import of education and the need to be focused in life. Strange enough, it was also my first time in Lagos, Warri boy in Lagos, but I was armed with enough street sense needed for my survival. And of course, I never went back. Coping with life in Lagos was no challenge. It was not different from life in Warri. Those trust elements of my days in Warri were also found in Lagos. In the mid-80s, I recall one particular scenario, and it sets me thinking if such still exists in our Nigeria of today. There was this vendor in front of the big Senate building at that time. I describe the Senate building as big because it was probably one of the biggest buildings I've seen at that time. Those were years when our local football league was popular and embraced by all Nigerians. You read about the exploits of Iwayawu National